On behalf of Muscular Dystrophy Canada, welcome to our first ever If I Knew Then What I Know Now, a focus on transition to adulthood. We're so grateful you're joining us this morning. I do notice that a few of you are on the West Coast. Welcome and thank you for joining us so early. We really appreciate your participation and encouragement of this event. We're going to go ahead to the next slide. You're hearing me in English right now. I encourage you that if you'd like to listen to today's presentation, to go to the interpretation icon, that is the globe icon, and select the channel of your preference. So I'm on the English channel. If you prefer to listen to today's presentation in French, we have simultaneous presentation available in French as well. So go ahead right now and take a moment to switch to your preferred channel. We're really grateful today that we have this conference is co-chaired by two clients of MDC, supporters of MDC, Victoria Lacey and Jared Wayland. Tori Lacey is a graduate of Ryerson University with a Bachelor of Arts in Creative Industries. She works in the field of digital communications, doing social media management, graphic design, and freelance writing. We also have Jared Wayland. Jared is a 33-year-old graphic designer from St. Catharines, Ontario, with a passion for all things music, sports, and design. Jared was diagnosed with SMA type 3 when he was 13, and he continues to advocate for those who are affected by the disease. I will then turn it over to Jared and Tori. Welcome again.
Thank you, Hamira. Jared and I are very, very excited to be hosting the Muscular Dystrophy Conference. I think that this is such an amazing opportunity for those of us to kind of have a chance to connect and talk about our lived experiences, especially as it relates to transitioning to adulthood. As Hamira mentioned, I'm a recent graduate of Ryerson University. I'm 24 years old, so I just recently went through that whole transition year. And I think that there was a lot of things that I wish I had known when I was making that transition to university and to adulthood, and going through all those very challenging years. And you know, there's a lot of transitions. So I think that this is a really amazing opportunity to kind of hear everyone's lived experiences. And this is a very unique conference in that our hope is that we get to hear from the panelists, we get to hear real life stories. It's not going to be medical based. It's really just a chance to connect with each other and learn from each other. So yeah, I'd like to pass it on to Jared, who can introduce our first keynote speaker.
Perfect. Thanks, Tori. And thank you to everybody for tuning in this morning to the If I Knew Then What I Know Now Muscular Dystrophy Conference. I am 33 years old, as Hamira already mentioned, and I'm really looking forward to bringing some of my experience I've had in navigating the adult system and the transition to the adult system for many years now, and seeing where it was and where it's come to today, and hopefully where we can go with it, I think is one of the big things we're hoping to get out of this conference. So thank you for coming. Looking really forward to spending the day with all of you. So without further ado, we'll get to our first keynote speaker, who is Jeff Preston. Jeff was born in Port Elgin, Ontario, and was diagnosed with a rare neuromuscular myopathy at the age of 3 months, which requires him to use an electric wheelchair. Throughout his life, Jeff has advocated for the needs of himself and others with disabilities, hoping to live an independent and barrier-free life. Jeff has completed a master's in media studies program at UWO, where he wrote about disability and the body in his master's thesis entitled Augmented Ability, Integrated Identity, Understanding Sapienism, Adaptive Technology, and the Construction of Disability. In 2014, Jeff completed a doctorate in media studies, successfully defending his dissertation titled Fantasizing Disability, Representation of Loss and Limitation in Popular Television and Film. Jeff's first book, The Fantasy of Disability, was published in 2016, and Jeff is currently an assistant professor of disability studies at King's University College at Western University in London. Jeff, I think I covered everything there, so I will let you take it from here.
Pretty much. I think you missed my social security number and blood type, but I can fill us in on that as well. Perfect. Great. Thank you. I am going to hijack all of your screens because in typical professor fashion, I have put a PowerPoint together because it's important for us to dive by PowerPoint on a Saturday morning. So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge the land. I want to acknowledge that I'm presenting today from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples on lands that are connected with the London Township and Salisbury Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I think it is important for us to remember that disability is everywhere, and that includes finding disability within our Indigenous communities, communities that are at the intersection of disability, race, and other forms of discrimination are in urgent need of help. And we need to remember that and remember that our experiences are different, but also our oppressions can be shared. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, a little bit of my thoughts as I moved my way from living at home with my parents to living in the big city of London, Ontario, and getting an education, and basically deciding that the real world wasn't for me, that I would rather instead decide to stay in university forever. In some ways, I wonder when I was asked to present here this morning if I was the right pick as somebody who perhaps never really grew up, just kind of stayed in academia. But I suppose now, as I'm almost 40 years old, which is a little bit hard to say, I suppose maybe I do have a little bit of experience, a little bit of battle scars, let's say, from moving out, living independently, and ultimately becoming regrettably an adult. So let's talk a little bit. Before we do, I guess, who am I? You have a pretty good rundown of who I am. But I think more than anything, I am a storyteller. I like to tell stories about things that I've experienced. I like to tell stories about things that I've learned. And that's really my idea here for this presentation, is to talk a little bit about some of the stories, to talk about some of my experiences and what I've learned from it and what I've gained from it. But broadly speaking, the story that everybody wants to know from me typically is why I'm in a wheelchair. This is the first question that pretty much everyone will ask you, no matter where you are in this world when you are confronted with someone. They see the wheelchair and they want to know. And my story, I guess, is probably fairly similar to some of the people that are on this call right now. That when I was young, my parents realized pretty early on that I wasn't quite the same as my older sister. I was then ferried off into the doctor's office, and it was there where I was diagnosed with a rare form of muscular dystrophy. Now, interestingly enough, at the time, I lived in rural Ontario, small town called Port Elgin on the beautiful shores of Lake Huron. And my parents were asked if they wanted to be a part of a parent group so that parents could come together and talk. And my parents said, yes, we would love to do it. That would be great to connect with other parents. And they were excited about it. They put their name on it. My parents attended their first meeting. And there was only 2 members of their group, my mom and my dad. There were no other parents in the area with children with muscular dystrophy. So we were kind of isolated up there. But despite that fact, my parents really did want me to be involved in the world of muscular dystrophy. They thought it was important for me to be able to meet and connect with other people like me. And it's for that reason that when I was quite young, I started doing some fundraising, started getting involved with Muscular Dystrophy Association of Canada at the time, MDAC. I think the couple letters have been dropped since then. And so in the early 90s, I was a poster boy for MDAC. I did that twice, in fact, 2 years in a row. And then I was the first national campaign assistant for MDAC. So I was traveling around, talking about the organization, talking about the disability, raising money, and of course, doing work on the telethon. And so in that world, I learned a lot about talking. I learned a lot about how to tell my story, about how to connect with people, how to talk publicly. And so perhaps it is no surprise that when I arrived at university in my first year, I was watching as a professor was speaking in front of the room, and I thought, I think that might be something I would like to do. And so I did. I've completed an undergraduate in media studies at Western, and I stuck around. I stayed around, did a master's in media studies, eventually did the PhD in media studies, and now I am an assistant professor of disability studies at King's, which is an affiliate of Western University. So what do I do in my job? Well, my job is ultimately based on research and teaching. So I teach classes on disability studies at King's. I teach introductory classes, I teach theory classes, and I also teach 2 classes on media. So disability and pop culture is my popular second year course. And my favorite class of all to teach is my third year class, Memes and Dreams, which is focused on my research on the representation and construction of disability in online spaces. So that's sort of me. That is me in a nutshell. I am a bit of a silly person. I think you could probably see. I've done some work in television. I've done some travel. And of course, I have published my first book, The Fantasy of Disability, which I don't recommend, frankly. It's really overpriced and kind of boring. So if you want to know what the book's about, just send me an email and I can tell you for free. So what have I learned in all of my journey? Well, I think for that, we need to go back to the very beginning of the transition to adulthood. And this is, of course, the moment when you leave your parents behind. Something I realized when I was in high school is that I found I was always being spoken for, that people always seem to know what I should be doing or what I should want. In fact, there seemed to not be a ton of space for me to make my own decisions out in the real world. My parents were always really supportive of me, and they really did want me to go out and to experience the world and do things and to direct myself. But they had faith in me in a way that I don't think necessarily other people did. In fact, often when I talked about wanting to go to college, university, people would often say, oh, I don't think that's going to be possible. How could you move away? How could you live independently? No, like you need to be with your family. Your family is there to take care of you. And as well, when I think about myself, I think about the ways in which I felt a real pressure to make my parents happy. I felt a real pressure to make the outside world happy. And one of the first important things that I needed to learn is that in some ways, I needed to start to think for myself. I needed to start to embrace the way that I could make decisions for myself. And the things that I wanted and the things that I liked didn't necessarily have to align with the desires of parents or doctors or neighbors or people in the community or just random people I ran into on the street. And I was relatively lucky because my parents came from a really interesting philosophy, which was that I needed to be ready to speak for myself. I remember when I was really young, my parents were in a fight with the school board at the time, which, of course, we all spend lots of time fighting them. And I didn't want to go to this meeting. I didn't want to go. I was like, this is boring. I don't like this. But my parents dragged me along anyway. And I asked my mom, I was like, why am I doing this? And my mom, in her sort of perfect, pragmatic way, looks at me and says, Jeff, one day I will be dead. And you will have to do this yourself. And I might die in 50 years. I might die tomorrow. You need to be ready to speak for yourself now. You need to learn how to fight for your own needs. Then you need to also learn how to fight for the needs of others. That really struck me, partly because it was terrifying to have this sudden realization that at some point my parents would die and I would be left alone on this world. But more than that, I had this idea that I could maybe change the world, that maybe I could have a good, positive effect on the world. So why should you start to speak for yourself? Well, frankly, because no one else will. Only you know your story, your limits, your needs. Part of your job in the transition to adulthood is to learn how to articulate that, learning how to speak for yourself. So I did. I started that. I started working. I started investigating my way into university. And I eventually decided that I would move out when I was 19 years old and attend school at Western. And when I arrived at Western, it was super scary. It was the first time I had ever been alone, away from my parents. My parents were like 2 hours drive away. So if something happened, I was like on my own. And I was now relying on the care of strangers, these other university students that I had hired to do my personal support work. The first night at Western was even more scary because most universities will move disabled students into residence before everyone else. So I was living in residence 2 days before anybody else was. So it was just me in a giant residence alone, very quiet in my own little room, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But a couple of days later, people started to show up. I started to make friends. I started to realize that this was actually possible. I actually got so interested and so deep into the university experience, I kind of forgot to call my parents after the first week. And my mom kind of freaked out, wanted to call the police to find me. Yeah. So rule number one, it is important that you leave your parents behind, but definitely remember to give them a phone call just so they know that you are okay. No, Mom, it's okay. I didn't die. I didn't call because I was having too much fun. As I started working my way through my first year at university and living independently, I had this sudden realization that living independently, independence in general, can be really hard work. The reality for somebody like myself and people with muscular dystrophy is that our time and energy just isn't the same as everyone else. We operate on what us in the field of disability studies might refer to as crip time. In some ways, our time isn't ours. We're dependent on the systems like paratransit to get us around, and they operate on their own sets of time. And frankly, it takes me longer to get ready in the morning or to eat or to do kind of everything. That means that being independent is about finding strategic ways to use your time. It's about learning your routine and planning around the time that you need, realizing that you have a right to take time, to be slow. That's okay. So be gentle with yourself and learn that you can say no sometimes, that you can be different. But being independent also means trying to figure out what are the systems that are going to be around you, familiarizing yourself, researching with, in my case, a new community. So what's the transit situation like? Do you have to apply? How do you call to book a ride? Who are the local funding agencies that are operating in your town? Can you get involved as a volunteer, maybe as a board member to help to direct that work? Those are all good things to do. Find the other disabled people in your community. Don't live in isolation. A great way to find disabled people? Sports. I think some of the most organized disability groups in the world are sports groups. If you don't like playing sports, even just going to watch means you're going to be able to meet a lot of really interesting people. And playing, honestly, could be a really good stress relief as well. It also means learning, though, how to manage your own care. And I think that is something that was the hardest thing for me to learn how to do, because I was no longer just a passive receiver of care. I wasn't just this person in a hospital bed where the nurse would come in, do their work, and leave. I now had to educate people on the things that I needed in order for me to live independently. I had to teach them how to lift me. I had to teach them how to make food the way that I would want, or teach them how to bathroom me. And that can all seem really intimidating. But remember that you are a holder of knowledge. You are the one with the secret knowledge of how you should be in the world. Embrace that. Share a bit with yourself, because people that want to come in and help and work also want to know about you, and they need your help. It really isn't about a person working on you, but rather a person working with you. It will be fun. It will be adventurous. It will be scary. The first time I had to fire an attendant was terrifying. She was very angry. She couldn't believe that I was firing her. She'd only done something silly like not show up for a shift twice in a row, but it was worth it. As upsetting as it is, as hard as it is, at the same time, I had to embrace the reality that I have a right to live happily, safely, reliably in my home. And unfortunately, that person just wasn't able to provide that for me. Last but certainly not least, it's important to remember that living independently is also about being creative. Part of your job as you transition into adulthood is finding solutions for the problems that you encounter. So I have spent a lot of time finding interesting ways to try to solve little problems as I come across them. One of the most important adaptive devices in my life, a hockey stick. I use a hockey stick for so many things. It's great for picking things up off the floor. It's great for hitting light switches. It's great for knocking things off of high shelves if I can't reach it, for opening and closing blinds, for picking up my cell phone when I drop it on the ground. A hockey stick is a great piece of adaptation for me, but maybe there's a better tool that works for you. So try lots of tools, try lots of things, and get a little creative with it. Learn how door pulls can help, how putting hooks everywhere to hang things. Learn about magnets. Magnets are amazing, and they can be used to do some very, very cool things. So think about these things. Think about how you can create a different world, one that fits your style a little bit better. I think in keeping with that idea, we also need to remember that the adulting world is one of iteration. Being an adult is an iterative process. And what I mean by that is we need to learn from our mistakes, learn from the errors. There are a lot of times in your life where things are not going to work out well or even right. For me, one of the ways that that has looked like is being stuck alone in bed. When I was in university, I had an attendant. I was up a little late the night before, full disclosure, that's on me, but I was a little sleepy in the morning. And so when the aide came in to wake me up in the morning, I was still very much asleep. And they asked me, oh, do you want to get up now? Because I really need to go get food before we start the morning routine. And I said, no, I want to still sleep. Now, I was actually fully asleep and have no recollection of that conversation. So instead, what happened was I woke up about 30 minutes later, only to discover that I was fully alone. The aide was gone. They'd gone to get food. I was alone and I had no way to contact anyone for help. I tried to scream. No one could hear me. I was in a little dorm room. And so I was stuck. And I was like, well, I guess if I lay here for enough hours, the next aide will come in. That's probably like 12 hours away. So I guess I'm just here for 12 hours. Now, luckily, of course, the aide did show up not that long after, about an hour later, but I learned from it. I learned that when I'm in bed, I need devices in order to call for help. So I started using a little device that would plug into the wall, and I would use it to buzz for help. But if the power was out, that wouldn't work. So I switched that up and started using a walkie-talkie. Walkie-talkies are great, don't rely on power source, but they do have batteries. The battery can die. Arg, now I'm stuck again. So I started sleeping with a walkie-talkie and a cell phone. But of course, I got a little wild one night. Arms were swelling in my sleep, and I threw the cell phone off the bed. Still another problem. But wait, there's a solution. An Apple Watch that connects to my arm, can't be thrown anywhere, can contact, I can call for help, I can call my aide, I can call whoever. Aha, solution. Iterative. Try something, let it fail, find a better solution. I think that is the key to being a disabled adult, creating the world around you that you wish to see. Last, but certainly not least, what I want to leave you with is an important thing that I had to learn as I was growing up, which is that I and you are not the problem. When I was in first year, I was wandering the stacks of Wayland Library. I was doing a research essay. I needed a book. And I was wandering around and I found this book sticking out that caught my eye. And on the spine of the book, the title read, "The Politics of Disability." And I thought, I pulled it out. My research project had nothing to do with that, but it caught my eye and I started to read through it. And I started to hear this language that I had never heard before. I started hearing this author talk about the ways in which in our lives, we are constantly told that we are the problem. People say, "What's wrong with you?" "I have muscular dystrophy." "What's your diagnosis?" "I have muscular dystrophy." The disability becomes the centerpiece of our life. And everything that doesn't go right is then blamed upon the label itself. But this book offered an interesting question. The question was, are we disabled because of the lack of muscle, because of the lack of the ability to walk? Or are we disabled by the fact that the world that we live in does not expect us to be there? Are we disabled by the fact that there are stairs at the door, not because of what lies in our DNA code? Are we disabled by the fact that we believe there is a normal person in the world? Ultimately, you have rights. You have value. Embracing that, living independently, living in the world, directing your own future, that is a radical act against the ableist system within which we find ourselves. You are not the problem. The problem is a world of inaccessibility, a world of intolerance. Ultimately, you need to remember that you are not the problem, and you are also not alone. There are people like me who are ready and willing to help fight with you and for you. There are other disabled people across this country who are ready to fight and help with you. And as you transition into adulthood, you too will get to pick up the banner and fight for someone else who comes after you. This is a fight we are winning. It's slow, it's hard, but we are making progress. So I hope you have a fantastic day today. I hope you learn a ton of amazing things. And I hope that you understand that it is a scary thing transitioning into the adult world, but it is also a remarkable, beautiful, exciting, strange, and honestly, kind of awesome thing. So best of luck. And remember, you got this. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you so much.